So we're here to talk through this challenging TomTom puzzle. Its history is that there was a 5x5 grid that had a 7x7 grid as two valid puzzles, and a reader said, could you extend this to a 9x9 form? And so that's what I tried, and it has only, I think, one very easy digit, which is that in this top row of the repeats, only a 1 can be possible in this far right cell. It can't be in any of the 11 cages. But except for that, and for this 4-9-4-9 pair, a lot of the break-in of the puzzle is built off the constraints of the earlier two grids. And so the very earliest grid for those who solved both the 5x5 and 7x7 form was recognizing these two 5+ clues account for everything that goes from 1 to 4. So all these other cells, including, I'll just mark this critical cage up here, all these cells are 5+ in size. And the second constraint, which is important to recognize in this grid, which is true as well in the 9x9 form, is that the 8s have minimal groups that can work for them. Specifically, a way to think about them is that an 8 can be a 1 with a 7, 8, or 9, a 2 with a 4 or 6, and a 3 with a 5. And those are all the sets that are possible. So the 1, 2, and 3 in this column will sit within these two cell 8s. A 5 will sit within those 8s paired with a 3, and then one of the 4, 6, and one of the 7, 8, 9 with the remainder in the open cells. So that means that functionally every other cell in this column also has a 4 or larger constraint on it. And so these two constraints that start in the original puzzle in a 9x9 grid actually immediately force a 4, 5 up here. Because if the smallest number here is a 4, the smallest number there is a 5, this is going to become an addition cage. The only option for the whole thing is this. And so that's a challenging break-in to see, but if you think of me as constructor needing to add a whole outside row of it, this constraint is forced just from the original 7x7 grid with a 1 to 9 number set. And so this is how I began the construction. And one of the things with this one being a 4 clue is, while it started with a lot of options, 3, 4, or 5 for this cell, actually 3 and 5 given this 4 down here, it now is fully specified as 1, 3, 5. And that will help us get a lot farther quickly. So it really constrains this 12. 12 can be 9 plus 3, that's no good. 8 plus 4, no good. 7 plus 5, that's no good. It can be 3 times 4, also no good. Or it can be 2 times 6, and that's the only option that's left over. That leaves in the rest of this row 1, 7, 8, and 9. The only pair that gets us to a 6 is 1 with 7, left with an 8 and 9, and the 9 already accounted for in this column. We get 8, 3, we get 9. This will have to be a subtraction, and that's 9 with 5. And that's sort of the first steps that play out in this puzzle. Let's come back to this column. We now know that the 2 will be with a 6, and the remainders will be 7, 8, and 9. So in this cell down here will be a 7, 8, or 9. And the cell up here will be a 7, 8, or 9. This is a 7, it places a 4. That is no good. If it's an 8, that places a 3, also no good. So we're forced to 9 with 2 at the start, and 7 and 8 down here. The next thing to think about, it sort of stems out from having done a lot of packing in this column, is back to the constraints that this column has all of its low digits accounted for. We at best have a 6, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8 in these cells, but we can do a little better than that. If the 7 or 8 are here, this 2 is going to be a minus or a divide, but 8 isn't a possibility there. 6 is a possibility, and I forgot to write 9 into these cells. It's just not true up here, which is why I didn't do it there. So this 7, 8 can end up being a partner to 6 or 9. So this cell is a 6 or 9. This cell we should think about, it's again 6, 7, 8, or 9. If it's an 8, it's going to be 8 with a 4. The 4 is already specified in this row because of one of these two cells. If this is a 9, that's a 4, vice versa. If this is a 9, that's a 4, but the 4 is accounted for. So an 8 isn't possible here. A 9 also isn't possible here. This cell is a 6 or 7 with a 2 and a 5. over there. We can come up to this cell, and this is where looking at this whole row is now useful. 3 and 5 are accounted for. The gaps that you're going to see, 2 and 8 are not useful for a 3 minus. So there's a 3 minus which is going to come from some set of 1, 4, 7 with the 4 required, and the remaining is going to come from 6 and 9. So this cell could be a 6, 7, or 9, but it can't be an 8. And so in this whole column, this long deduction is that only this top cell can be the 8. And it's sort of a second sticking point in this challenging grid. But again, it's working off of these two very constrained spaces that started at the very beginning. So 8, 3. With this 3 set, this 5 plus has to be 1 with 4. We haven't done this yet, but we can look at this column. 1, 5, 6, and 7 remain. The only 4 is 1 with 5. 6 and 7 is fine for these. We also haven't looked over here. Here we have 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. The only 11 that remains that's valid in that set is 5 and 6. The 8 that's left is 7 and 8. And the 2 stands alone down here. And we'll have a 1 or a 4 in that clue. We'll have to do some more work to get exactly what it is. So we had this 6, 9 mapping and 7, 4, so let's just actually think one step further about that. If this is a 7, that places a 4 here, but we've placed a 4 here, so it's not a 7. This is a 6, 9 with a 6, 9. Notice that we've now marked off both of these cells as being 6 or 9, so the 6 is not there. This is the only space a 7 can go that's left in the whole row, column, so 7, 5. I didn't do this yet, but having marked this one 4, I can actually force this cage with the 1 on the right side. Now I'm left with a 2 or a 6 in the cell. This has to be a digit that's smaller than 6, and 1, 3, 4, 5. If this is a 6, it places a 1 over here. That's no good. So I can actually solve that this is a 2, 5. And this is 6, 8, 9. This is 6, 8, 9. Let's think about this for a second. If a 9 is here, a 7 is the other number. If an 8 is here, a 4 or 6 can be the other number. If a 6 is here, a 4 or 8 can be the other number. We're going to have to, though, think carefully about how this works together. So if this is a 6 or if this is an 8, notice it's going to cancel the other side to make a 7, 9 happen. And so one of these cells is going to have a 7, 9, and that's going to force the 4 down here to be below and over here. That also means that 4 is not a valid number in these spaces, but 6, 7, 8, 9 are going to be in these 4 cells in some order. What's left over is 2 of 1 and 3, 5. We can do a little more. For instance, one thing that we can see right now is look at sort of in this column, where does a 9 go? A 9 can't be here, it can't be here, here, here. A 9 is going to be in this 2 minus space, so there will be a 7, 9 pair that's vertical, that's a 2 minus. And that means in a cell like this, a 7 isn't possible. It could be a 5. It could be a 4. It can't be a 6 because that will cancel with this 5 over here, and it can't be a 7 because of below. So this is a 5, 4, and this is a 6, 7. We can also map a little bit over here. It's just not as useful. It looks like 4, 6, 7, and 4, 5, 7 are currently what's forced in the grid. I can do a little more with these groups. So these two cages collectively say a 1 is not in this cell, this pair of cells. You could also have used uniqueness to say that the 1, 4 is below, but here we can just do it logically, not use uniqueness. Get a little further from that. It looks like the thing we really need to do, though, is think about this 8th row, which now is somewhat constrained. It has 1, 2, 3, 6, and 8 as all the values that can go into it. The things to think about. First, the 9 can be 3 with 6 or 1 with 8. So let's write 3, 6, 3, 6. And I do have one constraint, which is a 1 up there, says that the only orientation of the remaining ones is this. The 6 can come from 2 of 3, 1 of 6, 2 of 8. It looks like a lot of choices. A thing to keep in mind is that we need to get a valid placement over here. So let's actually put some more knowledge that we actually have now into this column. We said that somewhere we had to place a 3, 5 pair. It's not this bottom box because there are 5s already for rows 8 and 7 placed. It's also not this top one. So we don't have anything in row 4, but we have both a 3 and 5 up here. So the 3, 5 can only sit down here. That actually completes the 5s for row 5 and 6. And so the 5 over here is forced up like so. We now are left with thinking about the remaining groups, 1, 2, or 1, this will be 1 with 7, 8, or 2 of 6. It's worth thinking about the options that can go into this cell. And the 2 not being possible here, it looks like it's useful to think about if a 2 is not possible here, because that will force the 2, 6 up top. And so just mentally sketching, if a 2 is in this space, we now have to get a valid 6, and we said that a 6 could be 2 of 3, 2 of 8, so the only thing that's left is 1 with 6. If 1 with 6 is here, we have 3 and 8 getting up to 9. There's no pair that leaves out the 2 that goes to this cell. I think they're different. If you actually map all the pairs, there's a pair where 6 is in the cell, but we can exclude that. That pair is where we have 1, 8, and 2, 3. That leaves behind 6. If we take the 2, 3, if we take another group, what is it? 2, 8, 3, 6, we can get a 1 down here and get other things down here. Anyway, the critical thing is that 2 can't be left over. 2 can't be left over. 2, 6 is up here. And the 2, 6 that's useful, notice the 6 is already specified in row 3, is this one. That means we now have to place a 2 in this bottom space, and it has to be in one of these cells. And it's going to come with a 3 or an 8 in the other cells. So further thing is to see that a 6 has to be here. And if a 6 is there, that means the 1 and 8 clear out. And so that means this is now 2 of 8. And that leaves behind 1 right here. And so we don't yet have this specified, but this is giving us a fair amount of progress. And probably the next step to think about is how do we fill this column? The thing that you'll recognize from the pairs we've already marked is that the 3 is not accounted for in this column. The 3 is going to have to be in a 4 clue. It will be a 4 minus since the 1's already used. It's going to be 3 with 7. So the 7's no longer possible at the top. 6 with 5 forces over 3 with 5. That gives us a pretty good headway actually to now think about the next door column. We already said that a 7, 9 was one of these groups, and with these other 2 odd digits specified, it'll be an even subtraction that gives this second one. So the only cell that is possible for a 1 to be placed that's left is this one here. Gives us 1, 6, which gives us a lot of placement to the left. It does finish this set, which tells us 7 with 9. This is now 6, 8. 6, 8 in some order. The remaining digit here is 3 with a 7. We have a 4. The 4 has to go with 8. Makes this a 2. Makes this an 8. We have 7, 9, and an unknown pair, but it's going to be a 4, so there's not a lot to do here. But what I see is in this row, I only have one spot left for a 1. Makes 1, 4. This top cell is to 4 with 7. Now has to be like this. This row needs an 8 in it. It can't go here, so this is the 7. This is the 8. There's the 4. This is a 2 with a 6. We don't know which yet. Looking down here, that forces which one? The 6 also forces this, forces this. We have everything filled in this column except for this. This 6 now forces 6 with 5, 5 and 3. We're left to complete this column. The subtraction is going to be 7 with 9, and the remaining digit is 8. This is the only space left for a 9 in that row. This is 2 and 3, and 2 and 3. And we've talked our way through in only 15 minutes this hard puzzle. It likely took you much longer. It certainly took me much longer to test and solve this. And so we did succeed in expanding a 5x5 to a 7x7 to a 9x9 grid, and really used the existing clues heavily at the start, this 4-5 pair. And then it's really chipping into these columns first on the left, and then eventually these columns on the right, sort of using all the shared clues to identify unique digits that couldn't go elsewhere. So not sure how much you learned in general about TomTom puzzles, but I think some of the ways to specifically look at highly limited points, particularly these repeats that come together this way into these remaining cells, is how the puzzle broke apart. So I hope you learned a little bit at least about how to get through this challenging puzzle, one of the more challenging TomToms we've ever posted, and we'll see you again soon.